you in a sec. Good evening, folks, and welcome back to the Activist Show on Socialist Telly. Tuesday saw the ballots open in the MoMentum National Coordinating Group elections, and vying for those votes, as always with these elections, there are various slates of candidates with different ideas about how MoMentum should operate, how it should influence the Labour Party and the grassroots movement beyond that. The last time out, people may well remember the Forward MoMentum slate won a bit of a landslide, sweeping aside the Landsmanite old guard types, but this time there's a whole new slate for left activists to support, with some familiar faces and some fresh new ones. We have one of each joining us tonight: Southwest NCG member standing for re-election Darren McLaughlin, and a young lady I've recently come to know. We met at the recent Kerno Transform Festival, where we were both hosting panels, and indeed the only Cornwall-based candidate in this set of elections, Thea Pettitt, both standing this time on the YourMomentum slate. Welcome to you both. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Thanks for having us on, Damien.
Yeah, you're more than welcome, mate. You're more than welcome. Now, refresh our memories a little bit to begin with, please. The MoMentum NCG elections, what are they? Why are they important? And why does it matter who is running MoMentum now? You want to take that one, Darren?
If you don't mind, I'll take that one. So, MoMentum is a democratic, member-led organization. And it's the largest explicitly socialist organization in the United Kingdom. And the way that it works is that it has a number of paid staff. It's a bit like the Labour Party or something like that. It has a number of paid staff, but it has an elected leadership who are essentially volunteer activists. And the NCG is the National Coordinating Group. And the National Coordinating Group role is to kind of make decisions and oversee the political direction of MoMentum. And then the kind of paid staff, their role is to sort of implement the decisions that are made by the National Coordinating Group. So the NCG has elections every 2 years to determine who's going to kind of be leading this political direction. So as you said, 2 years ago, there was an election. The Forward MoMentum slate won a clean sweep of the membership ballots. And this year, so we're facing a new election now. But one thing that's slightly different is that we changed the way that the elections operate. So before it was a first past the post system, which means that one slate could win. And now we've changed it to a kind of single transferable vote STV system, which means it's very unlikely that one slate will win a clean sweep. And in fact, there will very likely be a kind of mixture of people from different slates.
And what do you think is going to be the benefit of having that?
Well, I mean, I think that by having a kind of single transferable vote system, which means that you'll get a blend of different people, it means that you'll have a more representative blend of different viewpoints from different spectrums across the left, which means that we won't all necessarily agree completely on different things. But in a way, that's a good thing, because it means that you will have a kind of broader spectrum of opinion represented on the National Coordinating, which means that you can have these internal discussions and debates, and hopefully things will be a little bit less sectarian.
Yeah. I mean, it's more democratic, basically, isn't it? I mean, everybody's vote actually counts now. This has always been the big argument against first past the post wherever it comes up. Is it's most people who vote, their vote doesn't end up actually counting for anything. It's a little unfair. So yeah, that's a great idea. It's great to see more democracy coming into the electoral process. Brilliant that you've done that. Thea, welcome to the show. Welcome
Hi.
to joining the MoMentum NCG, hopefully.
Yeah.
You're the only Cornwall-based candidate that members can vote for. So it's wonderful for you to have you here and speaking to me and people in your local area, and how we can, what you can propose for people locally down here. So please introduce yourself. Tell us what drew you to not only join MoMentum, but represent them. And actually, what can people voting for MoMentum, what differences can that make for people here in Cornwall?
Well, I started off. I'm a very baby Labour Momentum person. I started off as a climate activist a few years ago. I basically got involved with all of this through Kerno Transformed. Well, you sort of start off getting more and more involved in the activist stuff down here, and gradually they suck you in. So I've been a member of my local Acorn group for about 6 months now. Helped organise Kerno Transformed with Damo, as you say, and just through that, one of the big messages was really get involved in organising and get yourself into these little decision-making roles so that you can have your say. I was actually approached by the sort of Southwest YourMomentum team. Really pleased that they approached me because they're the side I would fall on, side of the kind of momentum organisers YourMomentum divide anyway, because they're very much about supporting local activist group and linking that up with established socialist organising and the Labour Party, rather than just focusing only on getting socialists into power. But I'm very committed to this sort of thing, and someone else has written some notes for me here, and they tell me I'm the sort of person that young people want to see in power. I'm certainly not the sort of Keir Starmer established Labour Party thing, and I would very much. I'm very cautious as someone who's lived in Cornwall for a few years, but who is not actually Cornish, that I don't go in and say I'm the Cornish candidate. I will be representing the Cornish perspective, but I'm very, very keen to do my best to represent the Cornish perspective as someone who lives here and is embedded in the activist community and in local networks like Acorn, to try and represent those opinions and the unique Cornish perspective in the NCG and make sure that Cornwall doesn't get left behind.
Yeah, you let yourself get cornered at Kerno Transformed. That's always dangerous. Those tents, see, they weren't round, they were square. You got caught in the corner. Yes. Acorn is. I'll tell you what. You say you're not, inherently from Cornwall. You live here. You know what's going on around you. The fact you've got involved with Acorn means you absolutely know what the housing crisis is like in Cornwall, particularly. It's a massive cost of living issue. It's very close to home for me at the moment. Actually, my sister has just recently been made homeless, and it's just an absolutely dire situation. And it's heartening to hear you bring that up when I asked you to introduce yourself fundamentally, because it means that you are actually switched on to the issues that are happening around you in Cornwall. You are aware of the issues that we face uniquely down here, and I was going to move on to say, why do you think you're the right candidate for the job? I think you've answered that pretty well, actually, because you just demonstrated that you are in touch with it. And don't worry about not being from Cornwall. We can adopt you. It's fine. My wife isn't Cornish either. My mother isn't. So
yes, I just feel I ought to wait to be adopted and not kind of barge in and go.
We're not descending into the world of Harry Potter with purebloods and stuff like that.
Yes,
that's long gone. I don't think anybody's got that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But Cornwall's political landscape. Let's move on to that now. It's a decidedly blue one. It's horrible, frankly. We got 6 Tory MPs. They're all awful. They all replaced Liberal Democrat MPs who were punished, ironically, for helping to put the Tories in power back in 2010. And this cycle of electing people from one party or the other doesn't help Cornwall whatsoever. They don't ever do anything for Cornwall. They don't deal with the issues that we actually face. Yet, if the recent Kerno Transform Festival proved anything, there is a strong socialist voice in Cornwall. It just isn't getting heard. So what were your thoughts on Kerno Transform? You were both there. How do you think it went? And how can you, as a local Momentum NCG member, Thea, help keep the momentum, if I can forgive the pun, from that event going?
Well, Darren, do you want to say a bit first, and then because I've just been talking.
Okay, I'm happy to join in. I'll let you know that I'm also one of the founders of Bristol Transformed. So we just held our 3rd successful Bristol Transform Festival last month, which was thriving. Bristol Transformed has been a really exciting, vibrant example of left organising and getting activists together in Bristol in the southwest over the last several years. I went to the World Transformed in Liverpool in 2018, and that's kind of the thing that's really set me down my political journey, because I was so inspired by attending the World Transformed there that before I'd been a Labour Party member but not especially active. after attending that and seeing and hearing all these speakers and seeing all this kind of energy and excitement, I thought, wow, we really need to do more to recreate this. So I came back down to Bristol and I said to people, I think we should put on something like this here in Bristol. And then I met a group of other people, said, we've been feeling the same way. We've been thinking the same thing. So let's get together and do it. And I'm really, really excited to see Kerno Transform happening because I want to see this model get rolled out. And I think part of the reason that it's so exciting and rewarding at the moment is that we all know that being a Labour Party member has been it hasn't been as fun, it hasn't been as exciting. It's been a war against the left over the last couple of years. So whilst the right wing of the Labour Party and the leadership and the General Secretary have been really attacking the socialist left, these Transform festivals can remind us, or an opportunity to remind ourselves, that actually our ideas are popular and that there are lots of people who share these values with us, and that we can get together and we can discuss these ideas and we can find ways to turn them into action. So one of the outcomes of Bristol Transformed over the last few years has been bringing in wave after wave of new activists who've been getting involved in the Labour Party. They've been getting involved in trade union activity. They've been getting involved in things like Acorn activity. They've been getting involved in things like environmental activism. So what is happening is that people are getting inspired and excited by this experience, and then they're going on to take action. And I think the fact that the Transform festivals, part of the reason that they continue to be an exciting and vibrant place to be is because it's a broad left. It's a situation in which people from across the spectrum of the left can participate and can share ideas and conversations with each other. And because it's not narrowly directed or exclusively directed at the Labour Party, because at the time when being a Labour Party member is not necessarily the most rewarding thing to be doing, you can still go along to something like this and think, okay, there are still other ways that I can be getting involved in building socialism. And I think this kind of like is in harmony with the message that the YourMomentum slate is trying to put forward. Because I think that the opposing slate, and I know many of the people who are on the opposing slate, the Momentum organizer slate, they're comrades of mine. Some of them co-organized Bristol Transform with me. But their pitch is basically Momentum has become too focused on things outside of the Labour Party, and that we need to be narrowing our focus and focusing entirely on within the Labour Party. But I think the reason things like Bristol Transformed and Kerno Transformed are so exciting and successful is because they aren't that kind of narrow in their vision, and because they're something that's open toward the broad left. Thea, I'll let you come in on this now.
Yeah, no, I quite agree with all of that, Darren. I mean, I think the purpose of Momentum shouldn't be to just get stuck focusing on the Labour Party, but rather should be focusing on what the Labour Party could be. And I think you're exactly right. These Transformed festivals are such an they present such an inspiring vision that it's like, oh, maybe this is what we should be trying to get into electoralism, but also outside of it. Just hearing you talk about how vibrant the Bristol Transformed Festival has become, I'm sort of sitting here hoping that I'll be saying the same thing in 3 years. We had a really good go this time. It was a little bit smaller and a little bit more chaotic than I think we all would have hoped, but it was really genuinely very inspiring. I mean, it's the first sort of event of that kind that I've ever been to, and I just sort of spent the whole time running around listening to loads of really interesting people talk very deeply about stuff. And it was I mean, there was amazing panels, but it was also a really amazing social event. I've got my little network of people, and we all kind of went up there, and so we were sitting listening to panels during the daytime, and then sat around the fire pit in the evenings listening to open mics and spoken word poetry and stuff. It was amazing. It really was a kind of inspiring thing to see a large group of people, of Cornish leftists, all in one place. Because down here, I think it's very easy to get stuck with, I mean, Falmouth has a fairly close-knit but thriving left-wing community. There's this brilliant coffee shop and bookshop that opened up a couple of years ago, and we've all kind of, is left-wing coffee bookshop, but we've all kind of coalesced around it. But over the whole of Cornwall, it's quite easy to get stuck in little pockets. It's a very, very specific perspective. I think we're up in Bristol and in lots of the sort of major cities, you have such a large pool of people who can basically get access to each other through public transport or just walking to places, that you can form quite large organizations. Down here in Cornwall, it is like to get from Falmouth to Helston, which I know is where Damo is, that would take an hour on the bus. And so either you're very reliant on cars or other people's cars, or you kind of get stuck in your little area. And between all of the kind of major population centres, and there's sort of Falmouth and Penryn, Helston, St Ives, Camborne, Redruth, St Austell, Newquay. There's between that we probably have enough people to make up a city and to make up these large left organisations. But this fragmentation makes organising in Cornwall a bit difficult. It's one of the big conversations that's happening in our Acorn branch right now. But having something like a festival that we can all coalesce around for a weekend was really, really special. And I think it kind of showed us what potential there was in Cornwall for this kind of transformative socialist organising. It was really inspiring.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the thing with Cornwall especially is the fact that we are a rural area. Everybody is in these little pockets, these relatively small towns, sporadically dotted around the county, not particularly well connected through public transport, as you alluded to there, Thea. We are heavily reliant on cars and stuff. And I'm going to come on to a little bit about that in a moment. But what I wanted to pick up on, as well as agreeing with your point entirely, that this festival does bring these people together and does make these connections. I suppose with you in Falmouth and Penryn, which is one of the most densely populated parts of Cornwall, it's been that little bit easier to organise and get numbers together. And obviously Bristol being a large city, I guess the organisation is a lot easier with more people living in a closer knit, in a more densely populated area. But the one thing I did want to ask Darren, mentioning you're on your third year of Bristol Transform, which is absolutely fantastic. Give us an idea for those of us who've only got experience of Curno Transformed and this single event that we've had so far. How has the Bristol Transformed event grown over those 3 years?
Yeah, well, I guess it's consistently sold out the 3 times we've run it. So every time we've run it, we've had it split across 3 or 4 venues, which are all within a sort of 10 to 15 minute walking distance of each other around this kind of Stokes Croft and St Paul's area, if you know Bristol. And yeah, we basically checked what the physical capacity is of those buildings, and we've just kind of capped the number of ticket sales at the physical capacity of those buildings. So that we because of health and safety and fire regulations. So we've sold something in the order of 500 tickets to all 3 of those festivals, plus all the kind of speakers and volunteers and what have you as well. But the way that it's grown is it's really kind of embedded itself and become an established brand, I suppose, in Bristol. Because when we first tried to put it on, none of us had any experience in putting on an event of this nature. I had a bit of an experience in event planning because in my past life I used to be an event manager for a brewery, so I had some experience in event planning. But outside of that, none of us had any experience putting on a political festival. We had no money, we had no idea how to do it, and we just kind of learned as we went over the course of 6 months. And we raised money through applying for kind of grants and funds from Labour Party CLP branches, trade union branches, and kind of other sources of funding. And we managed to just raise just enough money to be able to put it on. And there was an experience just before that where there was another festival which was put on. Have you ever heard of Shambhala Festival? The people who put on Shambhala, the music festival, were going to put on a festival of politics and culture, which sounded a kind of similar to Bristol Transformed. And I was going to volunteer at it just to kind of get some experience on the ground about how to run something like this. And then within a week of it being about to start, they cancelled it because of the lack of ticket sales. So that was quite concerning, because I was thinking, oh my God, if they haven't managed to pull it off, then maybe we won't either. But I guess the difference is that was a kind of business trying to run this festival in a way that was for profit and trying to appeal to everyone, whereas we were doing it out of passion because we were all volunteers, because we were all socialists, and we were doing it because we wanted to do it and we believed in the cause. So even though we had far less money behind us, we had a stronger kind of belief in it, and we were trying to target it at a specific audience of people, which is people who are on the broad left, people who have been inspired by Corbynism, people who are inspired by all these sorts of ways of activism that's taking place, which means we had a target audience. So now, over the course of the last few years, it's now a relatively well-established festival, and people across Bristol have sort of heard of it now. A lot of people have heard of it now. So there's a big music festival that's taking place in Bristol later this year, and Bristol Transformed have been invited to come and speak at this music festival, which means that we're reaching out beyond just the purely kind of activist left. So that's how it's managed to grow so far. And now it's a little bit more, we've made our mistakes, we've learned on the job, and now it's a little bit more professional. And I know exactly it's like we're putting on Kerno Transform, you're kind of like biting your teeth, biting your nails, and you're really nervous, and you're really afraid of all the screw-ups and mistakes you're going to make, and you hope it's not going to be a catastrophe. And then once you manage to put it on a couple of times, you get a bit more kind of confident, like, okay, we know what we're doing, and we think it can work.
Yeah, no, well, hearing that is really reassuring. I mean, me and Damo were both sort of in the little meetings in Penryn about how to do it, and it sounds a lot. It sounds a lot like what it was like for the first time for you. So that is reassuring, because it would be amazing if we could establish Kerno Transformed in the same way that Bristol Transformed has become established.
And I absolutely take my hat off to John and Dee Dee for organising it. They work like absolute Trojans. A pair of them are absolute legends. Right, let's get this back on track. I was going to make a crack about Darren being an obviously fantastic candidate, because he literally can organise a proverbial in a brewery. But let's now, the cost of living crisis is being particularly felt here in Cornwall, rural part of the country, as I said already, as is much of the southwest, frankly. And because of that, many of us rely on our cars for work, for daily lives. Our incomes are getting increasingly stretched by increasing prices there, not to mention the housing crisis, food bills. Our incomes are amongst the lowest in the country down here, yet our housing is amongst the highest. It's ridiculous. But is Cornwall unique in how these problems are being exacerbated by the cost of living crisis? How should these things be tackled more effectively for our region? And how do you go about convincing the powers that be of that? Thea.
Yeah, no, well, I don't think we're unique in that we have these problems, but we do have a very sort of specific context. I mean, Cornwall is seriously reliant on the tourism industry with the closure of the mines sort of 40, 50 years ago. And that has really created a massive problem, especially with the housing crisis, with second home ownership and Airbnbs. There's a stat that gets thrown around by our Acorn group a lot, and I'm not sure if it's still up to date, but it's that there's about the same number of Airbnbs up on the site in Cornwall as there are families on the housing register waiting to be housed. It's a massive problem here, and I mean, I'm a student, so I'm living in student accommodation, and so there's this interesting relationship between sort of knowing that I'm in a house that could be housing a local family, but I am living here and I am working here and I am here the whole time, and there's whole streets of houses really in Falmouth, but especially in places like St Ives, that stay empty half the year, or even for the whole year but 2 weeks, and then you get a family. I mean, there's the proverbial family from London that come down in their big SUV with the roof box on top, and then they stay in their second home for a couple of weeks, and then they leave. There's also a big problem with just with this tourist economy. There's loads of jobs available in the summer. I'm currently looking to get a summer job, but it's obviously, as a student, a temporary minimum wage summer job suits me fairly well. But if you're actually trying to live and work here, my friends who've sort of a couple of years older than me or more than that, it's really difficult. And yeah, you very much do get kind of stuck in your place. I'm looking at trying to get a car so that I can come up. Well, I'm going up to Bristol on Friday for a hustings for this NCG election, and I'm going to have to pay out my ass for a train ticket. But especially with trying to organise, I mean, I think there was a People's Assembly meeting up in Newquay at the weekend, and I couldn't get up to that because I didn't have a car. So these issues are everywhere. But they are kind of particularly prominent in just the day-to-day living of being someone who lives in Cornwall.
Yeah. Darren, obviously you've been representing the Southwest on as part of Momentum's NCG for the last 2 years. Obviously, yeah, okay, you're from Bristol, which is a big city, but the whole region, as you know, as I'm sure you appreciate, is very, very rural. What are the problems that as you see them, and what has Momentum been doing to try and address them? Because they're not new.
Mm-hmm. This is, I guess, ties in a little bit to the last question that you asked, which is, so last year in the build up to the Labour Party conference, the Momentum staff and NCG tried to phone every left-wing contact that we had in every CLP in the country, so that we could try to find out from them what are the conditions on the ground, what's the mood in your CLP, in your region. Is the CLP kind of like under the control of the left? Is it under the control of the right? Is it a mixed thing? Are you trying to organize to pass the conference motions that Momentum was supporting as a part of the policy primary? Are you trying to organize to send left-wing delegates to the Labour Party conference so that we can get these motions and rule changes that we need to be passed? And I called dozens and dozens of people over the course of hours all across the southwest and spoke to them. And I spoke to several people in Cornwall who told me that they had left the Labour Party, or they were no longer engaged in the Labour Party, and that all of their friends had left the Labour Party because they'd come under attack from the right wing of the party, and they were really disenchanted with the direction the party that was going in now. So what I think this demonstrates to me is that for many people, it's not a fruitful or productive place to be necessarily putting all of your energy and your time and your activism is into Labour. There are places where it is. Like there are places like, for example, in the last year or so, they managed to flip the council in Wandsworth in London from Tory to Labour, which has been a Tory-dominated council for decades. They've managed to flip the council in Worthing in Sussex from Tory to Labour. That was through patient community organising, which was done by the activists. And there are places like, for example, Preston, where it would make a lot of sense to be investing your time and energy in supporting supporting the actions of that council. But there are other places where the conditions are not the same. And as you said, Cornwall is mostly either Conservative or Liberal Democrat. Under Jen Forbes, you saw a kind of real resurgence of left-wing activity in the kind of CLPs that she was involved in Cornwall, and a massive increase in the Labour Party share of the vote. But that's kind of receding now because the right-wing Labour Party are in control, and they're no longer offering the kind of transformative ideas that someone like Jen Forbes was kind of like pushing for and encouraging. And under those conditions, I think it would make sense to be redirecting your energy and attention, not necessarily towards the Labour Party, which is not going to change things, but towards things like trade union activism. So if you're talking about how do we address the cost of living crisis, you can see how you do that through things like the RMT strikes, which are taking place right now, to things like the CWU strikes, which are about to happen, to things like the teachers who are about to go on strike. In Bristol here, we've got the St. Monica's, Unison are taking the St. Monica's Trust care homes out on strike. So there are still things that you can do to fight back. The working class should not be asking nicely for the government to intervene and say, oh yeah, kind of improve our conditions. No. The working class should organize and get together and demand it, because it's only through collective action, it's only through the labor movement we're going to be able to demand increases to our living standards and insist that the working class are made to pay the price for the cost of living crisis. So in somewhere like Cornwall, I would say it's probably more fruitful to be putting your energy into trade union activity and into community campaigning, like things like ACORN, than necessarily into the Labour Party.
Yeah, and obviously Cornwall now has its trades council. It's that fella John Witcher again, isn't it? He's heavily involved in that as well. And it's fantastic Cornwall's got a trades council, because they've been dying out all over the country.
Yeah.
And it really could take a lead on this right now, because it's hurting everybody, and absolutely everybody should get involved in a trade union. If you're not already in a trade union, then it's time you got off your knees and joined one, frankly, because everybody can join one. Doesn't matter if you're in work or not, if you're retired, if you're a carer, whatever, there is a trade union out there for you. And if the RMT and McLaughlin haven't been inspiring you this week in their actions and what they've been saying and who they've been taking to task, then what on earth have you been doing, and why have you not been paying attention? But I'm going to come to Labour, because obviously Momentum is as much as embracing wider grassroots movements, it's still inextricably linked to the Labour Party. And aside from overturning the Toriness of Cornwall, not to mention the rest of the country too, Momentum's raison d'etre has been to strive to influence the party of workers, Labour, through campaigning and lobbying, persuading them of the causes to support, and a lot more besides. But within the last week, we've seen Keir Starmer both tell his MPs off for joining those picket lines that have been so inspiring. And he's also stated in an interview that the 2019 Labour manifesto, with all of those transformative policies, regardless of what you thought of Corbyn, the policies we're talking about now have been shelved. Just how much work have you guys got ahead of you to change a mindset like that?
Oh, well, an awful lot, I would say. I mean, I think that one of the things that Momentum organisers keep saying that is so short-sighted is they keep assuming that they're all for organising socialists to get them into the Labour Party. I don't think that there is that existing socialist base in the Labour Party anymore. I've spoken to loads of people who, when I was sort of trying to get nominations so that I could run, people who were members back in 2017, 2018 and left because of what Momentum was like before the Forward Momentum campaign came in, and because that sort of transformative vision was left. I think that the thing that Momentum can do to be most effective in changing the way the Labour Party looks now is in supporting these trade union and activist movements on a local level and joining them up and providing that kind of transformative left-wing vision that we keep talking about with Bristol Transformed and Kernow Transformed, and then almost funneling that sort of inspirational, the brave and hopeful left-wing energy back into the Labour Party. But this is not a small ask. This is not a year's worth of organising. This is a kind of deep fundamental problem with what the Labour Party has become, and it will take a lot of work to get that grassroots energy back into the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Darren, I think maybe it's a little bit of an unfair question to have thrown at you, given that you're standing for the Labour movement rather than just inward-looking Labour Party business, as the other slate is making a bit larger amount of noise about. But it does kind of prove your point, doesn't it, with the way the Labour Party is looking like at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is I want people who are on the socialist left to be key members of the Labour Party. If they have left the Labour Party, I want them to rejoin the Labour Party. But what I want them to understand is that being a member of the Labour Party under Starmer is not like campaigning on their own personal politics. It's not some kind of like stain that goes against them. And what we can do to do that is like get people to realise the Labour Party is not something that you need to identify with as part of your kind of personality. It's that your identity is a socialist, and being a member of the Labour Party is an adjunct to being a socialist. Being a member of the Labour Party is not an identity in and of itself. So whilst the Labour Party can be a disappointing place to be and can be alienating place to be right now, if you can just be a member of the Labour Party and not necessarily throw all your energy into it, it means that you are able to vote when the opportunity arises to vote for good policies. It means that you can vote when the opportunity arises to vote for good people to be on the NEC. People like Mish Rahman, who I think has been one of the strongest left-wing voices on the NEC. And it means that you can try and vote to push forward good policies and good rule changes going into the party. But what I'd say is that the way that, as we all know, the Labour Party is fundamentally structured in such a way at the moment that it can be difficult. Are you getting me? Are you hearing me? Or is it a bit?
Yeah, it's a bit better now.
Okay. The Labour Party is structured in such a way it's either dominant as the right wing. And that means that there are certain rules which should be implemented by the Labour Party, which are just being ignored and disregarded, and they're just doing whatever they want. So I'll give you an example. It was when Jeremy Corbyn, when the HRC report came out, Jeremy Corbyn made a public response to that. I was the secretary of Bristol West PLP, and the Labour Party, David Evans, issued instructions which said no Labour Party PLP is allowed to discuss or do the founding of the HRC report But we allowed emotion to be heard in support of Jeremy Corbyn and according to the Union State. According to the EHR report, Jeremy Corbyn had broken no rule. So I allowed that motion to be heard. I allowed him to say that motion was passed by a majority of our members. And then I got suspended. And I was suspended for over a year. I was suspended for 15 months. I was a candidate to stand for election as councillor in Bristol City Council. And people contacted the NEC and said to them, listen, you've got to deal with this Darren suspension because he's about to stand in a lot of elections. You've got to have him in place so that he can stand. He's been doing all this work and doing all this damage to all these elites. To be able to stand. And the Labour Party just ignored that and just continued to have me suspended for 15 months. And there was no mechanism which we could overturn that. I got legal advice. I got support from MoMentum. I don't know if people are aware of this. MoMentum employed this solicitor, and this solicitor offered help and advice, which allowed over 100 suspended members to get reinstated. And we did everything that we could, but ultimately they could do whatever they want. So there are mechanisms of power within the Labour Party which we can't overcome. So we have to just bide our time and wait for the opportunity to arise for things to change. When Jeremy Corbyn became elected as the leader of the Labour Party, no one on the left of the Labour Party had been anticipating that might happen. People who've been in the Labour Party for a long time, under Blair, under Gordon Brown, under Ed Miliband, no one anticipated that the most left-wing leader in the history of the Labour Party would actually win. So the point is that we can't predict the future. You can't say, through doing action A, B, and C, we will take over the Labour Party or socialists and implement those socialist policies. What we have to do is to say, okay, let's retain our membership and wait for conditions to change. And the way that conditions can change is if we build a case for socialism outside of parliamentary politics. If we make socialism and build a grassroots base of socialism, that means that the Labour Party won't be able to sell us on their insipid and weak kind of down version of socialism, because people will know what they expect, they'll know what they demand, and they'll say that's not good enough. I'm not going to vote for this party. I'm not going to campaign for this party. If this is what you're offering, these are our demands, and because we've got a strong group of elected together who've gone through this education, who've gone through organising, and have got strong demands, and they know what they want. That means the Labour Party will have be forced to respond to action and belief through building this kind of strong Labour social state, both inside and outside of the party.
Yeah, thank you, Darren. You are still breaking up a little bit there, mate. So check your audio again. Just check you're all plugged in and we're on there for. Absolute solidarity to you, however, for what you've been through, what the Labour Party have put you through, for basically standing up for the left, for what members wanted, for allowing democracy to be upheld in your CLP despite some pretty draconian diktats coming down from the top. Your story is one that will be familiar to a great many people on the left, sadly, at the moment. But of course, you're absolutely right in what you said about Corbyn and the fact that he did so well because he was plain speaking. He was of the left. He believed in everything he said. And we're seeing that reflected again now when you do listen to trade union leaders like Mick Lynch, like Dave Ward, who are just saying it like it is. And people are engaging with that, and people are supporting these trade union strikes in a way that perhaps they haven't done when they were not, when these people were not getting a fair hearing in years gone by, when people were perhaps a lot more reliant on the mainstream media to inform them on such things. Coming back to MoMentum itself now, though, I think when it comes to it, it's certainly been my experience with MoMentum anyway, that it has had its ups and its downs with the direction it's taken, who's been in control of it. With Labour, with the state it's in, perhaps it's difficult to convince people that you can still change that. Members have come and gone. Some are caught with one foot out the door but haven't quite jumped. Others feel that where MoMentum has had a head of steam previously, it's kind of lost its way and is somehow less important now. So how would you engage members feeling quite apathetic right now, especially since you've just made that point about getting people to rejoin Labour despite the way the leadership is right now? How would you challenge those views and show that you're still making a difference and that MoMentum is still important and is still relevant?
Well, I mean, it's the large largest, most well-financed, explicitly socialist member organisation in the UK. And as Darren was just saying, I mean, the conditions right now are not there for us to have a big push to oust Starmer effectively and get more socialists in power. But having that organisational base and that kind of campaigning group, and I mean, to be a member of Momentum, you have to be a member of the Labour Party. And so you then have, if you've got a strong Momentum base, when the opening does arrive for the next potential socialist leader, or even on a smaller scale, you know that you've got a voter base of proper inspiring socialists in the Labour Party that can then come out in support of this candidate. So it's almost it's not exactly a biding your time kind of question. It's more of a working on it, but it's worth joining Momentum so that we can build that kind of support and build the networks from which these people will emerge, so that we can get them in power.
I would add to that, like, when I joined the Labour Party, like, before 2015, I was not interested in politics. I wasn't interested in parliamentary politics. I didn't follow it. And people might be surprised to hear that now because I'm a little obsessed. Like, I only joined the Labour Party in 2017. I only became active in 2018. And in the process of the last years, I kind of studied and read a lot about the history of socialism, where it comes from and how it emerged, and the history of the Labour Party and the history of socialism in this country and in other countries. And through kind of learning about it, like, I think quite a lot of people didn't have that background. I mean, I didn't have that background. So when Corbyn came along, when Sanders came along, people were like, "Oh wow, amazing! Something good's going to happen." They hadn't realised there's a long history where capitalism and the right wing have just been doing everything in their power to destroy the possibility of socialism and to keep the working class under their thumb. So through learning and through reading and through studying, I've learned now that the struggle is much more of a struggle, and it's a much more long-term project than I might have thought it was initially. So, oh wow, Corbyn almost won in 2017. We'll win next time. And now I don't have that kind of same level of naivety. Now I've looked at the kind of history. So what we need people to understand is that it's more of a long-term struggle, and it's going to take patience, it's going to take time, and that's what's to be expected. And the thing is you can see that it's still worth doing. So, for example, Momentum on the NCGs that we currently have, Rory McLean was elected in Scotland, based in Glasgow, and Momentum in Scotland managed to organise to get 6 socialist MSPs elected at the last Scottish election. And those socialist MSPs have now come forward with policies like rent freezes, rent caps across the country. And now they're really fighting in the Scottish Parliament to actually implement that, and they're forcing the Scottish government to kind of respond to these demands, which means you can see how, like, being a member of Momentum and being an employee party means that even if you're not going to get into national government with a social candidate, there isn't a Jeremy Corbyn figure in charge of the party, there are still ways that we can influence things. We've got Mark Drakeford in Wales leading a Labour government there. Obviously, there are people on the left who have criticisms of the Welsh government, but nonetheless, like, they're implementing things like a test on universal basic income. Something that was right now. There are ways and means that you can utilise the power of the Labour Party at local and national and regional government level to try to fight, change people's lives for the better. Esslin went from being one of the most deprived cities in the UK with massive levels of unemployment and poverty, being the most improved in the UK, with a much improved economy, much greater levels of employment, and much higher rates of pay, because they did things like implement the model. And that's the kind of thing that you organise and fight for at local government. So it's not going to be easy, and I think, to be honest, the Momentum organisers, it is sort of suggesting that if we just organise harder and take over the Labour, we can take it back, and it's a snap, thankfully, we can win. I think that they're sort of giving people a false vision. We have to fight it patiently, explain to people that it's going to be hard work, it's going to take some time, but it is worth putting in that effort to build that base.
Yeah, I think that's a much more realistic position to take, certainly. Thea, I'm going to come back to you now because you are involved in another organisation outside of Momentum called Climate Strike. You've spoken on the climate already during the course of this interview, but the name suggests climate-related issues would certainly be key ones for yourself. So who are Climate Strike? What's your involvement been with them, and how do your aims there blend with or differ from Momentum?
Yeah, well, I mean, I got my start in doing activism when I was 17 with, Youth Climate Strike, and that's the sort of British organisation that's part of Fridays for Future. I got my start as a youth climate striker after being inspired by what Greta was doing. And I mean, I think both me and Darren consider ourselves to be eco-socialists. It's very clear that to me that the issues of climate and the issues of capitalism are, well, it's one and the same. They're worker exploitation and the exploitation of the natural environment. They very much come from the same unequal economic system. And so I think there can be a misunderstanding. We were in a climate call yesterday as part of this campaign that we're running. And I think there can be a misunderstanding where you have sort of these middle class, upper white upper middle class climate activists who just get involved in it because it's almost seen as a slightly apolitical issue, given that it's going to affect us all. And then you have working class trade unionists, truck drivers, people who work on oil rigs, who see these environmentalists as being threatening to their jobs. To me, it's of absolutely paramount importance that we understand these as part of the same struggle, the same extractive, exploitative reasoning that allows us to chop down the rainforests and to pollute the rivers is exactly the same extractive, exploitative reasoning that allows people to extract labor and not from workers and not pay them the amount of the work that they're doing. So I wouldn't consider there to be a sort of significant difference in the aims of my climate activism and my sort of socialist organizing. I very much see them as sort of one and the same. I very much take a sort of eco-feminist analysis of the whole problem.
Yeah. I mean, I've spoken in videos myself of this sort of thing where it relates to Cornwall, as you say, the social and economic exploitation. For example, I think they're now investigating the plausibility of mining for lithium in Cornwall, which would be a great economic boost for the region if there is sufficient amounts of it in the ground. It used to be thrown away, I believe, in the old tin mining industry. It was a byproduct. Oh, if only they knew. But there's every chance that somebody will come in here and make millions and millions and millions off of mining it, and the region sees absolutely nothing from it.
Exactly.
I mean, it happened in the tin industry. And from a climate perspective, I've often thought of how wonderful a region, Cornwall especially, could be for tidal energy, or wind, or
even the north coast. You could just
under Penzance, they've actually got geothermal. I think their outdoor swimming pool over there is heated through geothermal. There's all sorts of different little bits and pieces that could be done down here, but it's persuading people to invest down here, and then it's making sure the region sees the return.
Yes.
So how can you, is this something you're championing, or are these the sorts of things that you would take to a parliamentary group to lobby them on and pressure them to start thinking about?
I mean, absolutely, yeah. I'm involved with our local kind of COP26 coalition, and they've got a tenuous working relationship with Cornwall Council down here, but very much pushing that I think there's been the recent levelling up funding that's come down from central government, very much pushing that when we do get that funding, it gets used to train up Cornish people. I mean, one of the classic things is skill up a workforce of people who can go and insulate people's homes, because then you're creating jobs and you're dealing with the climate crisis and you're also bringing down people's energy bills. So there's lots of different ways of sort of solving multiple problems at once, but I would absolutely go in and be an advocate for a whole variety of climate policies and a diversity of them. Actually, I think that one of the really important ways to tackle, I mean, the climate crisis, but I mean pretty much any of the problems that we're trying to solve, is that we make sure that there's a real diversity of tactics and that we don't become too reliant on one way of solving a problem. Because that kind of, I mean, I'm studying environmental science at the moment appropriately. That's sort of when I was looking at prospectuses when I was going to picking where to go to university a couple of years ago. I want to go and be useful. I'll go and learn environmental science so that I can properly understand these issues. And one of the things that has really come out of that is this sense of, I mean, a healthy ecosystem, a resilient ecosystem, is one that has a massive diversity of different species. And I think we need that in our strategies for dealing with the climate crisis and our strategies for dealing with capitalism and in our left-wing sort of ideology. I think it's one of the things that YourMomentum represents better than Momentum Organisers, is this plurality of perspectives that gives sort of diversity and is sort of regenerative. And I think it's the kind of thing that comes through in the sort of transformed festivals that we were talking about earlier.
Darren, do you want to come in on any of that?
Of like how momentum helped to raise the issues of the environment and climate in Cornwall. Yeah, I mean, the circumstances are going to be depending on where you are. So, in Bristol, we had a council with a Labour mayor and 4 Labour MPs. However, none of them are really on the left of the Labour Party. They're all sort of like central right-wing Labour Party. When Labour for a Green New Deal emerged in 2019, I got involved in setting up Labour for a Green Deal in Bristol. At the time, Martin Rees, mayor of Bristol, was under quite a lot of attack and receiving a lot of criticism from the Green Party councillors and Extinction Rebellion and the youth strikers in Bristol. And so we thought, as Labour for a Green New Deal, let's think of a way that we can work productively with the council in order to try to win them over to our vision of things. So we set up a small group of us, like 4 of us, set up a meeting with Margaret, after a meeting with Martin Rees, and said that we wanted to talk to him on behalf of Labour for a Green New Deal. And we got into this meeting and we prepared for it in advance. So what we did was we looked at the record of Bristol City Council and identified the things that they were doing that were good, that were positive, and that we wanted to celebrate and praise. So we went into the meeting, and Martin was saying that ready to defend himself, like the same script that he used against the Rebellion and the Green Party and the youth strikers, to preempt any of the criticisms that he would get. And instead of doing that, we kind of like wrong criticism by saying, hey, we're here to say Bristol City Council really impressed by this that you've done and this that you've done and this that you've done. And what we want to do is to help you to do even better, and to continue that work that you're doing, like working with us on with Labour for Green New Deal. Why don't you support and endorse this motion, this goal motion, and back it and get it passed in the council in support of a Green New Deal? And then, like, he was flustered. He didn't know how to respond to that because he was just waiting for us to criticize it, and he had his prepared answers ready. And we were like, no, we're not interested in that. Don't worry about it, and move on. So, luckily, we did manage to get the City Council to pass that motion and to say that they were going to like decarbonise by 2030 and support a Green New Deal. And now, by doing it in that way, it meant that we were thinking strategically about how we can do that. So, what I would say is, wherever you've got a Labour MP and a Labour council, you can try, as momentum members, you can try to work productively through the channels of the party. But where you have, say, a Tory or Liberal Democrat dominated local politics, you might want to stick to places outside of the front of the Labour Party. So if you can build coalitions with organisations which are not so overtly attached to the Labour Party or to momentum, through things like, for example, the COP26 coalitions, which are or coalitions of people from Labour, also the Greens, also other kind of political backgrounds than none. And there might be a way for you to think through these things and try and work productively in a way where you can try to get things passed. But I'm not going to sit here and say there's a simple solution to this. Ultimately, we do need to capture the power of the state, like do it at a local government level, because local government doesn't have the money, frankly. Like, the only way that you can get the money is through getting elected to the national government, which is why, although the Green Party has lots of policies that I think are good, and I think are admirable, the Green Party is not going to get elected to the national government. The Green Party has one council in Brighton, I think, and people who are supporting the Green Party, when you face them, but don't you want to actually do something about the climate crisis? Don't you actually want us to decarbonise by 2030? And yeah, that's why I'm supporting the Greens. Well, the Greens aren't going to get elected, right? They're not going to get that, which means if you wanted to work productively to try to achieve the goals that you say that you have, and you really should be working with the Labour Party. They're the only realistic route, achieving national power, taking the power of the state, and then we can actually do these things.
Yeah. Now, as I said at the start, the two of you are standing on the Your Momentum slate. As a final question, I know you've raised a couple of points along these lines already, but just to reiterate, if anything else, what sets your slate apart from the Momentum organizer slate, and why should members back you over them? Thea?
Well, they're mostly focused on just organising within the Labour Party, and we obviously consider that to be a very important part of the role of Momentum. But we are also very keen that focus goes into left-wing organising that we can have success with now, so that we can build this broad socialist base that can then rejoin the Labour Party. And so to do that, supporting the work of trade unions and local activist networks to sort of find and train up the left-wing organisers that will then be able to retake the Labour Party for the socialist left.
Yeah. Darren, you want to add anything to that briefly?
Yeah, I would add that when Forward Momentum ran a slate in the last election 2 years ago, one of the things that we were standing on is of democratising Momentum, making it more accountable to membership. I would say that over the past few years, demonstrated that. We've introduced things like a policy primary, which means rather than just say these are the policies that we implement members and elected, we ask Momentum members, what policies would you like to see? And then we get them to submit them, and then people put them to a vote, and people voted the ones that they liked, and those are the ones that we took through. And like you can see that, like, one of the things that happened shortly before the last election was that the leadership contest happened, and Momentum put forward and the arena as the person they were going to back as the executive leader of the Labour Party without any kind of consultation. They didn't ask the members, who do you want to be the executive leader of the party? They just said, well, it's going to be answer yes or no. And I think people were really angry about that, because why did they pick out the reason they picked the arena was because they went into negotiations with other power brokers and organizations on the left to say, okay, who can we get to win here? And like, I think members would have probably preferred someone like Rich Berger or Dawn Butler, but Momentum didn't offer them that opportunity or that choice. They said it's going to be at the imposed answer. So one of the things that we've done is we've made it so that Momentum, rather than just saying these are the candidates, you have to back them, you democratise the process of who we're going to support. And I think that that's one of the distinctions between the Your Momentum campaign on the slate and the Momentum Organiser campaign, who I know kind of like working with a lot of the old guard kind people who say we get to decide who is going to stand for this in that position with you. We don't believe that. So I think that's one of the fundamental things. So democracy is not a distraction. If you believe in democracy and you believe that people should have their say record of the organisation, like,
brilliant. Darren, Thea, thank you so much for your time today. It's very much appreciated, and I wish you both the very best of luck in these elections. As I said at the start of the show, ballots open for Momentum members on Tuesday. You have until the 6th of July to vote, so you don't have long at all. And if you wish to rejoin Momentum in order to vote in these elections, you can. You have until the 3rd of July to do so. Thank you very much, both of you. You've made a wonderful show, and I wish you all the very best of luck myself. Take care now.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.